Now, what we'd like to do is I know that Ollie and some of the people supporting him in this new venture would very much like to get your opinion. So let's welcome to the stage some of those who are in support. Could we welcome please Tim So, Kate O'Connor, Greg Lynn, Alex Wiseman. That's collect the set, isn't it?
I think that's it, yeah.
You will discover, as they talk to you about this, in the case of the animation companies here, they are in support of the new organisation already. Kate is a consultant, has been working recently for Creative Skill Set, in fact, so has a strong background knowledge of the animation sector. But as Ollie said, we very much want this to be a conversation with you. He's asked me to moderate it so that in a sense he doesn't do his usual thing of controlling the room, which he's really good at. So we've got a couple of microphones, I think. Where are the mics? They're at the back. There. Okay. So one will be working on the side and one the other. And I'll just ask the first question. What are kick and cock? What?
Sick and sock.
Sick and sock.
I love that.
It's close.
So sick and sock codes are how, that's what I have explained it, is when you go and get your car insurance and they make you scroll down that infinite list of job titles and you realise that you can't find animation, and then you either select you're in the TV industry, which puts your premiums up, or you select yourself as an artist, which gets your premiums down. So that's some good advice there. They're what the government measure the skills with. They only update them about every 7 years, and there's an opportunity this year, I can't remember which one they're updating, the SICK I think, to update them and get themselves recognised. Why it's important is they tend to put them into, they have 5-digit codes, which is like your individual code, and there's 4 digits, you get lumped into a bigger box, into the creative industries box. So most of our value does end up in the creative industries box, but it's just spread far and wide. So film pick up some, graphic design pick up some. We never have a value. So they are codes that the government use to measure. They're old-fashioned, they're difficult to change. Again, games don't really exist in there either. So there's a lot of people that want them changed, but they're extraordinarily difficult. It's a sort of universal code, so I think the United Nations is involved or something crazy like that. It's madness to get them changed. If we can't change them, one thing I'm trying to do with the BFI at the moment is a big bit of research that basically pulls in all the value. It's got through the first stage. It's going to be put towards the lottery funds, that side of things, the BFI. So if we can get a report then that allows us to plug information in manually, and we're a trade body, then I think we'll be allowed to officially declare our own value rather than rely on other things. So SICK and SOC are important, but they're not the only way to get value.
But let me ask Kate, why is it important that this industry, this sector, as we might call it, can declare its value? What will it get back as a result? I want to ask some of the basic 101 questions, being a bear of very little brain.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to give you the pound signs in my answer. So firstly, can I just explain why I'm slightly an interloper on this panel? Because unlike everyone else, I'm not from the animation sector. I've spent actually 2 decades setting up and working for Creative Skill Set as the exec director and deputy CEO. During that time, I worked with all the industries across the creative sector, so film, TV, games, but advertising and publishing, fashion, and the whole spectrum. I have a profound and deep love, I think you mentioned the word, both of you this morning, for the animation sector, but huge respect, and have often from that vantage point seen how difficult it was for the animation sector to make the kind of inroads into lobbies, into attracting development funding, into seriously getting on the map for education and training. In fact, just about everything without that official designation of being a sector. That's how I've always felt it.
It's the capacity to calculate the value that you're putting into the economy that's one of the things that's missing in the equation.
I think it's one of the essential things that's missing. And when I was listening to Ollie just then, I was thinking about that value point. And it is craft, it is culture as well as content. I mean, we do need to really recognise those things, and the sectors do quantify those values. And in terms of what we need to do now and why now is so important is a lot's been achieved, a lot's been disappointing in terms of some of the findings in the reports, but seriously now, I think the sector needs that kickstart to profile, it needs that kickstart to prominence, and it needs that presence, that sectoral presence to really unlock all of that policy.
Lindsay, I wanted to ask you just briefly. I mean, I found your report a little bit depressing, I have to say. It's more. I mean, here we are in the building, you know, in which we celebrated tax breaks with fizzy wine. So, I mean, to quote our illustrious leader Ed Vaizey, you know, you got your tax breaks. What more do you want?
Well, I think that's one way of looking at it, but from my perspective, I'd like to see a lot more offered to our industry. You know, I'm a foreigner, I've come here from Canada, and what is so scary about trying to make things better and more achievable for people? I mean, to help answer your question about the SIT codes, there are two policies in particular that use SIT codes to allocate funding to projects and businesses. And if we're not meeting those requirements of being visible within the industry, we're losing out time and time again. And when you see how we compete internationally against other countries to try and get productions here, animated productions in the UK, it's scary because we're an expensive place to produce animation, so we need all the help we can get. And it would take very little, actually, when you look at, Kate made a funny comment this morning about mind the gap. You know, the amount of gap that we need to invest in development is quite small compared to some other programs that I've seen other initiatives being invested in.
Okay. I'd like to ask the three people from animation companies, perhaps the four, to, if you can, briefly react to Kate's report. Greg, what does... Lindsay.
Well, I'm definitely not taking credit for that.
Still working on that.
Yeah.
Lindsay's report, indeed. Greg, what's your first reaction when you saw it?
There's a lot to read, but luckily a lot of it was appendices. I think it was a great piece of work. I know you're just twiddling with it and going to finish it off. There are some facts that are slightly out of date, but you know that, and I'd like to give some feedback on some of those things. It is depressing reading. I think that the tax break helped get this country back onto a slightly better level playing field. When you consider the benefits that particularly Canada, France and Ireland have been receiving from their government. But as soon as we did, almost all of those countries jumped ahead of us again in order to stay ahead of us. And Ireland's animation business barely existed before the government stepped in and started to aid it. And now it's like a roaring fire. You know, it's attracting inward investment from the Canadians, from Americans. They're setting up studios on the mainland, and good luck to them. But their government has recognised the benefit that Irish talent in the animation business can bring to the wealth of the nation. And that's what we're sadly lacking here. We don't even exist as an industry, as a particular skill set. We're a bit of this and a bit of that. Perhaps some of you are metal workers, perhaps some of you are producers, perhaps some of you are voiceover artists, but you're not really considered to be animators or in the animation game. So I think the report's really useful, but I think if you condense it all down, it simply says we have to get more support on a governmental and cultural basis, and also somehow we've got to convince English investors that there are animation projects that are being developed that can make profit. And I say English investors because foreign investors look to England hugely because we are considered to be very, very good at doing what we do, creating characters that travel globally. And Americans, Canadians, French, now the Chinese, the Far East, they want in, they're coming tapping on our doors. But we have to give away such a large proportion of our IP in order to get their money, in order for us to make our own stuff. And somehow we've got to try and change the tune and attract British investment so we can keep our IP here.
Alex, what would your reaction to that be?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. I have to confess I haven't completely finished it yet because it's a bit of a tome. But I've been reading it with great interest, and hats off, Lindsay, because you've covered all the bases, I think. So really interesting. It's incredibly close to our heart because, as many people know, I think at Arden we produce very little, very infrequently, and it takes us a really long time, and it's really stupidly expensive. But there's a reason for that, which is that we do try to have majority ownership in all our IP from the outset, and that's how we've always worked. It's been a bit needs must because the nature of stop frame animation doesn't really lend itself so much to co-production, and it means that all the processes tend to need to stay at Arden, and also because we're very keen, and the owners are very keen on making sure that we keep that crew on board and we keep nurturing that talent, and that's a really important part of it. So if we were to start sharing that workload and co-producing more, then that would really prove, it would be bad for the company, the studio, and also what we're trying to do in terms of growing the animation industry in the UK. But you know, our issue is you know, one of the big issues for us is development financing. Unfortunately, even though we're, you know, I suppose a fairly large independent studio, not as large as yours, Ollie, but still, we don't have these coffers into which we can dip to just develop things. And like pretty much everybody else, we have to turn to Creative Europe for support. And luckily, actually, because I know that they don't necessarily support everyone, and in fact, I think that's bad in itself. But we do benefit a lot from that support, and frankly, we're supported by Europe in terms of developing new content much more than the UK. In fact, completely and not at all by the UK, other than by our wonderful broadcast partners who do help us wherever they can and whenever
So
they
you'll
can.
be voting against Brexit?
I will be voting against Brexit because that will absolutely, I mean, I would always anyway, but you know, it really will actually affect us even more negatively. So I think what I'm saying is that if we had some sort of a development fund in the UK, then I can tell you, guaranteed we would be developing more shows at Arden. It's that simple. But we can't, so we're very, very careful, we're very selective, and we only back horses that we're absolutely, you know, as sure as we can be that will work and will deliver margin to us, even if it's 5 years down the line, and we take the risk.
So what we're talking about here is a squeeze on risk-taking.
Yeah, completely.
And without risk-taking, we don't come to it. Quickly come to you, Tim, and then I will throw it open to the floor.
Hello. Right, so I'm a hater of acronyms, I don't like them, so I just want to, for the sake of people who don't understand what a SOC code is, it's a standard occupation classification, okay, you got that? And a SIC code is standard industry classification. So that's what those things are. But basically, the gist of it is that we need to be in it to win it. So, you know, we need to standardise our practice. A few of us got together a few years ago and we set up Animation UK in a very ad hoc way in a pub in Soho. We all, you know, at the time our studio had just gone down. Another example of that. Been going for 20 years and it stopped. So, but we got together as a collective and we came up with Animation UK and we come up with some money to report. You have to do a report to get things noticed by government. That got noticed and we put our suits on, went to the Treasury, or someone's put our suits on, and we met the good people there and we got the tax break and hooray for that. But what was interesting was that it's fair to say that the Pact and the high-end drama lot piggybacked onto our hard-fought win. And the upshot of that, to many, is that although it was animation that was a big part of getting the tax break, it was, we're now seen as the real tiny little bit of that rather than instigators of it, which is a bit rich. So if ever was the case for properly funded Animation UK, it's this sort of thing, the perception that we're the poor relation, those cuties doing kids stuff, rather than being a real industry, the ones that can bring home the bacon. You know, for example, you know, we are now Tiger Aspect. It's a wonderful company, proper company I respected for a long time. We produced Mr. Bean. 52 11-minute episodes, set up the biggest studio in the UK to do it, as a result of the Animation UK fight for the tax break that enabled that to happen. Now, the thing is, you've got all these excellent people who we assembled, all paying their tax, all paying their rent, all living and doing nicely, and the fact is that for every pound that comes in from the tax break, £12.49 goes back into the economy. Now that's something, isn't it? That's something we've got to kind of push for and not be seen as some sort of poor relation. We're not. You know, we are. You know, when they do posters, what's on that? That's the Aardman thing. Yet why are we seen as the outside? If you roll in, why shouldn't the guys doing all the wonderful effects work at the CG houses be seen as animation? I mean, it's stop frame. It's frame by frame. Surely that's animation. That's where the definition begins and ends, if we do it frame by frame. So we've all got to stop fighting in our little blinking silos and start looking at the big picture and come together and set up an Animation UK which is sustainable, so that we can argue our point.
Thank you. I'm going to throw it open to the floor. Did you have a question? Or were you just waving one? You're waving. Gentleman here, middle back, just wait for the microphone. And if you just let us know who you are and where you come from.
Dave Jenkins, used to work for Nickelodeon and now I run my own company. Very, very specifically and very simply, are we talking about doing a very big marketing job? And if we're doing a big marketing job, do we have to have very, very set objectives? Because the message can get very diluted, so we need to work out as a trade body what 2, 3, 5 things we need. And then, like politicians, when someone asks you a question, you say, thank you for that question, now we're going to talk about creativity in Britain, the money that comes back to the country, and that sort of stuff. I mean, I think that's what we have to agree on.
You're already better at this than me, so you should apply for this job. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we need, and they need to be short-term goals and then longer-term goals. As I say, some things come in waves. The sick and sock codes every 7 years or so you get another chance of changing them. But more importantly, like that, what is the most important thing for us? Is it money from the government, or we need to try and stand on our own 2 feet more? So how do we encourage more people to invest in our industry and perception? So you're right. As a group of people, we need to set the agenda. It can't be what I want. It can't just be shouting that we want more. We've got to sort of take a grip of it and say what we want.
I mean, exactly, because if one of the objectives was we want a development fund, then the people that want to invest in a development fund want returns. So very, very simply say, you put a £10 million development fund into British animation, and we can forecast that this will be turned into 100 million in 5 years' time.
And that doesn't matter if it's individuals or the government, because the government can and do invest in different things, and in IP, and there is the patent box things that they do that, but they also want to see returns. So like you said, £1 in, go on, £12?
£12.49.
£12.49 out. So it doesn't matter who's investing, they'll want those returns. But actually, if you compare us to the film industry, I saw somewhere that something like 6% of films ever make a return. Now, before we start making an animation, just my studio, just speaking for myself, before we start making an animation, we have to show closed financing loops, which often involve several partners. So I reckon, in actual fact, we're probably a safer bet than many of these other screen industries. And it's that people don't get. I've been trying to raise an awful lot of money for a show. I did a presentation, someone came over from Hong Kong for it, and when I said how much that I projected we would make over 10 years, they threw back in my face, but we've got your government figures, your industry's not even worth that much. And I go, how can you argue with that? How can you argue with that? I'm interested in hearing ideas now. I'm going to send a letter out, which basically is what I said earlier, plus some other stuff. There's a very loose funding structure that I think would get us to where we need to be. Again, there's 600 studios in the UK, not all will be able to afford to pay into it. So I've done some sort of assessment. But yeah, it's your ideas. What out of the stuff we've all said is important. I think the apprenticeship stuff is massively important, because if the help from skill set goes away and next gen is going away, the apprentice stuff is a really good way to get support. It's the way the government it's pushed us into that corner. So I think that should be top of the list for the things we need to achieve first, as well as becoming this trade organisation. There's all sorts of boxes to tick that, and this is why Kate is on the panel. She set up a creative skill set from scratch. She's got that experience, and we may, if everyone's in agreement, again, it's not my shout, may look to her to help us get through that initial phase before we can find someone to run it full time. And maybe even part of the opening remit would be to find that person, like Joe Twist, who can drive us forward.
Alison Warner.
Like I said, who I am. Alison Warner from Technicolor. I have the advantage of working for a truly international company, but I feel certain things resonate very strongly with me. And Ollie, what you were just saying about apprenticeship, I think this is key. I hear, when I travel all over the world, and hear about studios in Canada, in Ireland, that are fit to burst, because there are companies like DreamWorks and Netflix that are pushing out service-based gigs. And I don't see any of it happening here in the UK. So I think from the start we have to think about apprenticeship, creative skill set, how we build up that talent base. Because without that, this industry is really a twofold. It's development, it's also service and work. And I'd really like to see a situation where in the UK, we have, in Toronto and Vancouver, they're literally fighting over hiring staff. It's so difficult to get good key people because there's such a demand. And I don't see that happening here. And what I'd love is to hear that, Netflix plays 2 huge series in the UK. It's just not happening. And I think that's really important, and I think this is where creative skill set can come in.
Reactions from down the table.
Well, I just wanted to, because I can't, and I don't speak on behalf of Creative Skill Set anymore. I left Creative Skill Set 15 months ago, so I'm now entirely independent. So I just wanted to make that absolutely clear. The current situation with apprenticeships is very much that organisations like Creative Skill Set or Next Gen the Next Gen Academy do have that, I know they do have that vision for developing strong apprenticeships in sectors that don't have them, they just don't have the funding. So it's a kind of circular argument. We keep going around this same argument about how do we unlock what funding might be there or unlock the support that the industry needs if we can't unlock a perception that it's not even a sector. And so for me, that all of these things are linked. And so when I had said the 4 Ps, I'm a consultant now, I have to do that kind of stuff. So it was profile, and it was prominence, and it was presence, and it was policy. And that includes, obviously, the messaging. Absolutely agree. There has to be a kind of total agreed message from the industry, and that has to be backed up by the evidence that we need to gather quite quickly. And the presence and the prominence needs to force things like developing apprenticeships, which is a very, very important issue, but just one in the training, spectrum. It's just on everyone's mind because it's obviously the levy comes in next April and employers are going to pay that if they're a certain size. So everyone's on apprenticeships, and I agree it's important. But I can't see any of these things in isolation. They must all work together, and that's been almost, despite the absolutely brilliant work that Animation UK have done, that needs to be the next step, to put all of those things together to make the cases. And I was just thinking, in terms of the the way forward, it is about strategy and it is about services and it's about setup of an organisation. It is about those 3 things, and now seems to be the critical perfect storm or perfect climate to take those forward. And you'd have to have a triage list. You'd have to have a triage list, agreeing the messages, sorting out apprenticeships, getting that research done, but getting around the table and being respected as a sector that has a voice is absolutely critical for all those things.
Are there examples in other countries of pure animation associations. Lindsay?
Yeah. Animated Ireland, France, South Korea. Oh, can you hear me okay? All of them have specific development funding for animated children's television.
And do they have animation producers associations?
Some of them do. Some of them just have producers associations, and then animators kind of make up a group like with PACT. I mean, now we've got the Toronto Irish Film Festival has a whole day dedicated to animation, and it's just incredible to see that. And I want to be a part of that.
It's the evil axis, the Canadians and the Irish both getting together.
We should be there.
Yeah, CMD.
Tim Patterson.
Thank you. Yep, it's Tim Patterson, formerly Nickelodeon. I've got my own company now. On the subject of apprenticeships, oddly enough, next week I'm giving a talk about creative apprenticeships with the Minister of Apprenticeships and so on and so forth. It's at the Leicester Square. And I'm working with a company that is specialising in delivering apprenticeships, and they are looking at delivering apprenticeships in the creative industries. Now, it's not animation, but it does mean that I'm going to be with people who we can start injecting this idea with, which is all later, but certainly the whole idea of actually having animation as a specific part of that is going to be very important. It's very much on the agenda of a lot of people at the moment. So.
And you have hot news then for this this event, the creation of an association.
I will certainly, and we will talk after this, but certainly I will put it into my talk that this is something that we very much feel is necessary to embrace not only the industry but also keep the industry alive. And to Alison's point about making sure that we are servicing the industry with quality and giving opportunity for younger people as well who might not go through natural routes of education.
Can I comment?
Yeah, please.
That's fantastic news, and I think one of the reasons we don't have an animation apprenticeship, my understanding is that because it costs £50,000 for an educational institute to certify the apprenticeship, and that's too much for one company to pay for. So that's my understanding of why it's an issue for next gen, and hopefully something you can bring up as well.
Can I just interject there actually, with my creative skill set hat on, which I wear, and that is about the apprenticeship, because there's so much to cover in apprenticeship, so I can have a separate conversation with you, Tim, because there's several, I can imagine several companies in this room that think, I don't know about the apprenticeship levy, and it probably doesn't affect me, and it is going to affect everybody from an SME up to a larger company. Because the point here is the sort of what creative skill set are doing is we're lobbying to say that the development of standards, they don't always cost 50 grand, but they do require one large company to lead, and then they need 10 companies to approve that standard. And the government are saying at the moment that the development of these standards has to be met by industry, and we're lobbying to say that actually the credits that are built up in terms of the levy should be placed back into development. And it is worth noting that what you're saying is at the moment for the animation sector, the cupboard is bare in terms of the standards. So you will all be paying into the levy, some of you will, and you'll go to the cupboard and there's actually nothing in the cupboard for the animation. So, but what we are talking about is lobbying and saying about the credits. At the moment they've only got a 2-year, they expire after 2 years for companies, so you get a digital credit if you stop to pay the levy, and that at the moment goes away after 2 years. We're lobbying to say that it should be 3 or 4 because the standards aren't set up yet. And we're also lobbying that the pound for pound it goes back into the creative industries. Once you pay the levy, at the moment it's a free-for-all for any sector to grab that. And we're saying it should just go back into the creative industry. So Tim, this is what you're going to sort of come up next week with, really. So, but it's worth saying that the SMEs in the room, the smaller companies, you might not think this will affect you, and it does. And it's time and effort. You know, the 2 VFX standards, 3 VFX standards that went through cost over the 50k mark.
I think one of the really good things is though, that because the VFX industry have been working on some things, and there are production ones, I think that some of the core work has been done, so I don't think it's going to be as expensive. But you're right, it's some of the technical stuff we need to do. Like I was told about 4 months ago to go away and find the 10 companies to talk to Biz and would I help lead that? And I said, yeah, I will do it, but I just haven't had time. So again, it's that thing of.
But also there's some terminology there, and that is that just to say that animation already has some NOS standards, some national occupational standards, that we could possibly adapt to off-the-shelf standards for apprenticeships. And also to say that it doesn't have to be the 16 to 19-year-old apprenticeships, it could be degree apprenticeships, it could be that last year of college or after college that we could look at the level 6, 7s for animation, which might suit the industry. Because what we're hearing all the time is that people aren't production ready leaving universities. And therefore, so therefore what industry can offer is more on-the-job training, which could match, a level 6 or 7 apprentice. So there needs a lot of lobbying, and it's not all bad news because that is already happening. We are talking about it. Wales, correct me if I'm wrong, Wales have chosen to adapt their national occupational standards. Scotland are doing the same. England are choosing to do them from scratch. So we're currently lobbying to say, well, come on, we can adapt it. And it's fair to say industry are already doing training, and what Biz have said, and this is quite important for Tim, Biz has recognised the term training could easily be changed into apprentice. So a trainee could become an apprentice. So
I think there could be, and maybe there is, a whole session on apprenticeships.
Yeah.
But I think the point that you've made there is, one, a lot of work has already been done and exists. I know that in terms of what was the legacy from Creative Skill Set. Two, that can be turned around with your support and in-kind contribution quite quickly. Because three, as well as some large companies paying the levy, this is about actually smaller companies being able to benefit from that and take on apprentices. And they're not just the traditional apprenticeships. So the models around working with universities that people have talked about for ages, about having proper, workplace experience built into degrees, and people coming out with degrees, but also with an apprenticeship under the belt. I mean, that's a fantastic model, and we should be quite excited about being able to develop that.
And this is one final point, and it's worth saying that the first standard, and this is for you guys to decide, the first standard out of the block could be just a general animator standard.
Yeah.
Because that's already been developed for games and VFX, so we could easily adapt for animation or across those sectors. So we could hit the ground running doing that. And it is worth saying that we can lobby as much as we like. It's also currently a government, that sort of like they are so overwhelmed with work, they push back all the standards. So when we talk about a timeline for a standard, we're talking at least 18 months to develop that, because government rejects it every 6 months at the moment. They're too busy.
Right, I want to just come back to, I'll come to you in a moment, Adam. What this organisation is going to be, what it's going to be like. Have you as a group given any thought into the sort of companies that might be invited to join this association? Are we talking purely children's television, as it were, children's animated television? Are we talking film? Are we talking, as Tim mentioned, Viz effects? Are we talking about distribution companies? Are we talking about freelancers and consultants to the industry? Are composers, writers? Who sits in this organisation?
I've put a lot of thought into it, and how broad you go will be dictated by what your remit is, as we said earlier. What is our big push for? I already have support from some distributors, so I know distributors are keen because they're also keen to see conditions for them improve. So I think anyone with an interest in animation, now that doesn't mean to say that I want to start taking, it's not me anymore.
Let it go.
Let it go. The Animation UK would want to start taking people away from people like the APA, the people who represent more of the commercial side. But what we would want to do is have a close tie so we can assess the value of the work they're doing. It doesn't mean that we would want to pick up on the business side of stuff that the PACT is doing, because I don't see the value in us doing this, because they're already doing it well. What I do think we can do is get much closer ties with the commercial world, people who are trying to produce animated features in this country, the effects houses, because I have much more in common as a worker with the people that are sat down at DNEG than I do with people pointing a camera at something. I could go down to DNEG or go and work on a game and do some animation there as a core skill. So I would be, I would be happy to make it as broad as our issues allowed it to be.
Right. Reactions down the table?
Well, apart from who would be part of the group, and I personally believe it should be everybody involved with animation in some format to get strength of numbers. But the single most important thing is raising enough funds to employ someone full-time on the proper salary and to support that person doing the job properly. So they're not scratching around, going around the world to various conferences that we all do, but they're properly supported. And to David's point, that there is a marketing budget put aside, and once those 5 points are agreed about what we're pushing, get on and push them, and with relentlessness, we will get there. But if we don't do it, we're going to slide away. And the influx of foreign companies coming in buying up British IP is increasing by the week. HIT's not an English company anymore. The originators of Peppa Pig were bought by a Canadian company. DHX owns Ragdoll. They own CPLG. How many British companies are left owning proper chunks of IP that brings in so much to the exchequer? And that was when you split down the single most important factor that won our argument when we trotted off to see people like Jeremy Hunt. We saw Parliament MPs on both sides. In fact, Jeremy Hunt was just waiting on the election results. And I remember him saying to us, "You are kidding. You think I'm going to get into power and I'm going to stick my hand up and say, well, we need money for the animation business when there's health and education." We said, look, we know those things are important, and we don't expect you to do them in place of that, but we want you to do it in addition to it. But it was that thing when we split it down and said, look, and we showed them the figures, how much Bob the Builder's brought into this country from a British originated person and company. And then the penny began to drop, didn't it? And they thought, God, are you really worth that? And we said, yes, but it's just not understood. And I think it's very much, just finishing, very much a point that we're seen as the people that make little kiddie shows, and it's all fun, and it's a bit DIY, and not a proper industry. We have to change that mindset.
Adam, Sally.
Thank you. Adam Sally from Union Media. I'm a distributor. I just wanted to make a couple of suggestions that I think would be important for an industry body. Firstly, I think it's important to have a plan for a contingency plan for Brexit. You know, it's a real possibility. If that happens in June, then suddenly the media grants get cut off. So something that's open to the industry at the moment for one, the development, two, for TV production grant will instantly go away. And I think that the government would need to be lobbied to put a UK replacement for both of those grants into place. Obviously, Brexit, would be followed by a huge amount of chaos. But the squeakiest wheels will get the oil, and we should be a squeaky wheel. That was the first thing. The second thing I think is the most important challenge for the industry is financing new projects, and I think that some kind of thought should go into how the best way, basically investors can lay off some risk if they put money in. Currently there's EIS and SEIS, but they have a 3-year time horizon, and the 3-year time horizon, when you look at a new TV animation series, just doesn't work. So I think there needs to be a specific investment incentive that allows investors to defray some of the risk of money that they put into animation projects. Those would be my suggestions.
Can I add to that, sorry, quickly, just to say that I've been able to attract some Canadian funds who would be happy to match fund a TV development, international co-production pot of money, but it has to be matched by a national organization with low administrative costs, who can also match the other half of the funding. And in the UK currently, there's no organization that's able to do that. But I feel like if we can look at perhaps Animation UK or perhaps another NGO or government department or something to be able to say, yes, we can match those funds, then that's a real possibility. And again, it decreases the risk because you've got international partners who can set aside that cash.
Who's got the microphone? Tony and then Sonia.
Hi, Tony Collingwood. I suppose I'll speak with my PACT hat on. I like what Ollie had to say about finding that difference between other trade bodies such as PACT and CMF and the other people who are around, because you're right, PACs do the business stuff. They're stronger because they're across a whole bunch of genres. I think it's great that Animation UK redefines itself, reinvigorates itself, and goes out there specifically for our industry, and works, obviously, as it has done in the past, alongside PACT and all the other trade bodies, because we do want that point of difference, so that everybody who's kind of a member of PACT and also thinking about becoming a member of Animation UK can understand that point of difference. So once that's worked out, which I'm sure it will be, I think it's great. I hope it all works out.
And Sonia, can we take the microphone?
I was just thinking that surely the first step is to just find out what actually finance is around. I mean, Ollie, you mentioned some companies, but having come from a language background, language school background, I would have thought that a federation of British animation companies should be put together. Maybe some memberships from people that were British companies, but and reset up the Federation of English Language Schools, and everybody joined together, joined it and paid a subscription, and that body grew more and more powerful and represented the whole of the English language federations, and you know, it's become a very powerful body and lobbies the government and things like that, you know, but it starts with finance and what is available at the moment.
I think so. One of the key things is the reason we can do this now is because we're slightly better off than we were. So I know the report and what we're saying paints a bleak picture, but I was at an event last night where it was said in London there's 300% more animation than when the tax credit started. So the reason we can do this is because we're on a bit of a better place. But to get to where we need to be, that you know, it's going to take a big effort.
So, Nick Rose, animation production company in Bournemouth. Listening to everybody say, I think the thing that's shining through the most important is that we are able as an industry to get one person who can lobby government, who has got the time to do what Ollie did, but to spend it lobbying government to get the SIC and the other codes sorted out. The other thing is that the BBC seems to be the most important player in the UK. They're the one with all the money. So one of the things we could be lobbying is that the BBC spend their money just in the UK.
Reactions to the BBC just going? Jack, I wasn't asking you for a reaction. Give it if you want.
You know, BBC, we're there to inform, entertain and educate the very youngest audience in the UK, and we have to reflect and support the UK industry as well. And from CPB's animation perspective, we do a pretty good job in supporting the UK, which I'll talk a bit more about specific incidences, but you know, looking around the room, I can see lots of faces that we're working with currently, worked with in the past, and a lot of productions where they'll be 100% animation, so we do a bit. We're not perfect. At the end of the day, if we find a fantastic idea from another territory, and we think it's going to do something special for our audience, we'll go for that. Be honest about that.
You can't obligate the BBC to just produce, just commission UK stuff. I mean, it's got to be about quality.
And we also need to show the world to our audience as well.
Yes.
But we are better than other countries, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, is that what you're saying?
I disagree with you, Ollie, because that always ends badly.
And actually, if the BBC were, which they won't, ever to take them up, then when do the Americans, Canadians, French say, well, sorry, we're not taking English stuff?
You can't be protectionist. We don't need to do that.
No, I don't really.
But we are already behind on our European British content delivery percentage. So we are under delivering according to the information I've seen already. Is there a plan to kind of increase that amount of funding for that type of British content to fulfill our European remit?
Oh, I don't think that's the BBC.
Are you talking about origination of the BBC? Are you talking about the whole of the UK? I'm not talking much more because you're talking about.
It was from the Pat Ragdoll report, and it was about how public broadcasters overall we've failed to deliver that remit to.
Yeah, it's broad.
Across the piece in the UK, that's probably true, but I don't think it applies to the BBC.
I just wanted to say, just to a couple of points. I just wanted to speak to a couple of points that John, well, actually 2 or 3 people have talked in the room about, you know, I think part of it is also about the messaging. I know, Ollie, you've done a lot with this already with your lobbying, but there is such a misunderstanding by the powers that be in government about what animation is all about and the value of it. And for some reason it's not very sexy. And I think that that's because it caters mostly for kids and it's all about cartoons, and it's just not considered as sexy as we all know it is. I mean, you know, when you think about the emphasis placed on, you know, high-end drama, blue-chip documentaries, and zeitgeisty kind of reality, non-scripted shows, and sports programming, and huge live events, and shiny floor shows, you know, they're up there. They're the ones that are always promoted and talked about. I went to Charlotte Moore's Vision for the new BBC channels a few nights ago, and I mean, I mean, she was just only talking about the 4 channels, but you know, there was animation actually on those channels, but that would be the last thing on their minds in some ways, I feel. Not on CBBC, of course, because I know you guys would have, you know, stepped right into the story, but you know, and it feels like people don't understand that, just in the same way that I know all of us have been approached by corporations, for instance, who say, oh, let's do a little animation. We want to do a little corporate animation, and you know, how much would it be for, you know, 2 minutes? And you're like, well, £250,000. And they're like, but it's animation, and you know, you're a low budget, sort of non-scripted half hour of commercial telly could cost £50,000, and the equivalent average for animation would be upwards of £250,000, and that's the kind of thing people just don't realise. And we need to continuously educate them about why does it cost so much, why it also lasts so much longer, why it can go on for generations and generations, where a lot of this other content is just you know, dropped in the ocean. So I think there's, you know, and I know, Ollie, you've talked so much already about trying to get them to understand what that's all about and why that heritage is a lasting heritage, but I think that is a big part of it.
Simon.
Oh, yeah. Simon Forrest, Code Music Publishing. First of all, well done, Lindsay. I'm glad someone did the work, and look forward to reading it, illustrated version, soon. I just wanted to say that, you know, we need to talk to the investment community. And when you put this new format together, please think about a subcommittee or a group of people who know their way around the city, because the traditional ways of we're hearing about SEIS and EIS investments, as Adam said, they don't work. But there's a lot of people out there with a lot of money, and they will come knocking on your door, because one thing that people like to do, and people with fund managers, etc. in the city, is they like thinking about cartoons because they've got young kids. And there's a lot of people out there who will help you, us, financially engineer a situation where you can go to investors and you'll get 30 or 40, 50%, not just the 20%. And it does happen. For example, there are a lot of very, very wealthy families in this country, and there's family wealth funds. And I know at this moment of companies that are talking to these people. So what I want to say is, yep, development funding is okay, lobbying, broadcast, etc. But think about that strategically, and I think you'll get a result, because it happens in other countries where you can put money in and you'll get a return. We are still collecting music royalties on properties that are 20 years old. You don't get that from drama, you don't get that from shiny floor shows. Animation is actually a very, very rich, it has huge potential for investment.
So I think you're going to be quite popular in the coffee and lunch breaks.
I don't have any money.
Just an idea.
Let's come to Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy Louise from the CMC. I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying, Alex, about sort of a lack of interest in the animation sector. I think not only in the broadcast environment, but I think in the cultural funds. I'm talking about the BFI specifically, and they show complete uninterest in the children's sector generally. In fact, we have both the CMC and the CMF have spoken to them for many years, really, about why children do not kind of have any impact at all upon their view of the world, and they don't include children in their list of diverse communities or interest groups at all, which we find extraordinary. So I think the Animation UK would actually be a really positive force for asking the BFI to actually change some of their some of their policies, because I think if they start to view animation as one of their kind of core production areas, I think that will be a benefit to the entire children's production community. I mean, if you look at the animation tax break was followed quite swiftly by the live action children's tax break, so I think the whole children's community actually should be behind supporting Animation UK.
As part of my research, I interviewed a member of the BFI. It was very kind to give me their time, but what they helped me realize was that their remit would only ever be able to support animated feature film and short film development funding. Never would it ever be able to change to support TV development funding. Now, that's a conversation I had with someone one-on-one, and maybe I'm not very scary, but I hope that if we can try to look at different ways to get funding from sources potentially other than the BFI, we might have more luck, because what my research has shown me is that that possibility of getting TV funding from the BFI appeared as though it was a closed door, definitely.
I think get our own stuff together, get our own funds, be the controllers of our own destiny. Don't rely on the BFI, don't rely on all those little pots of money. Get our own funds.
I really need to wind it up, otherwise I'm going to get coffee, but I want to do one thing, and that is to say, how many people in the room would be minded to join an organisation of this sort?
Checks will be collected.
Hooray.